Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of Hit the Limit Break, the podcast that takes a step back from the daily news cycle of the gaming industry to take a look at the bigger picture, to try and discern the future of the industry by speaking with those who are crafting its puzzle pieces. Today, I am joined by host and producer Andrea Rene. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today.
What's good, Tom? Thanks for having me.
What is good, Andrea? Yes, so we're speaking now a couple of weeks out from you wrapping up What's Good Games. We're going to jump all into your history with What's Good Games, prior to that, what the future looks like. But before we get into that, we do have 5 questions that we ask every person that comes on this podcast and kind of see like what everyone's opinion is on each question. The first being, what is, outside of any kind of obvious answer, the biggest difference in the gaming industry now comparative to when you first entered it?
It's a very different place in the industry now than when I first entered. My first video games job was in 2008 at E3. And looking back, how incredibly different not only video game development was, but
Mm-hmm.
video game media, since that is my specialty and where I spent the majority of my time. First off, video game news on YouTube wasn't really a thing. It was mostly just, I believe IGN at the time had just started doing some news videos. Video in general for editorial coverage was mostly limited to trailers and a handful of sites doing reviews, but it was just so difficult to capture video game footage back then. You had to
Yeah.
have special developer kits and special equipment and hardware. So it was incredibly limited and difficult to actually create that kind of content. And just seeing how ubiquitous video content around video games is today is a really fascinating look back at just how far we've come in, a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah, it's funny looking back on. I've seen people like I think Gary Whitta posted a picture of the setup when he was running. I think he worked for PC Editor, and like you'd have to take to film the footage. You weren't using a capture card. You were literally filming the screen of the television. You had to have like a curtain to make sure that like the light wasn't escaping, like all of this. And even into that was like maybe the early 2000s, late 90s, but even still, like, yeah, the ubiquity of it all. Like, I'm looking at all of the gear I have around me that allows me to do this, that even 10 years ago wouldn't be as ubiquitous as now. So that's a really interesting look at things. So that E3 job, what was that job?
That job was working for a small blog called thebitbag.com, which no longer exists, but it was
Shocker.
a job I found on Craigslist
No
for
way.
a reporter for E3. And at the time, I was doing freelance hosting and looking for entertainment news jobs in Los Angeles. But it was the recession, the Great Recession, and the Hollywood writer strike had just happened. And it was pretty much like a wasteland for trying to find work for a junior up and coming on camera person. And I saw on Craigslist this ad looking for a reporter for E3, like the mecca for any gamer, right?
Hmm.
And the ad said, there is no pay, but you get a badge to the show. And I was like, I don't care. I just want to go to E3. I think this would be so cool. And it was my very first job. And of
Wow.
course, hook, line, sinker, here I am. And over 15 years later.
Obviously, you spend a lot of time gaming and talking about games, and you've obviously built a career around that. But if you weren't a gamer, what would your professional and personal life look like?
That's a really great question. It's really hard for me to know
Hmm.
because the trajectory that I was on, I ultimately learned that it would take me many years to be able to be on that path. And working in entertainment news or even in lifestyle hosting as a 20-year-old was virtually impossible back then. Now, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, of course, have really changed the way that people consume all kinds of video content. But it's hard to know, like, if I hadn't found video games, like, would I still be doing producing and on camera reporting? Would I have transitioned back to traditional news because my degree's in broadcast journalism. Would I've moved to a small market like every broadcast graduate does, and you start, small and then work your way up from a bigger market to a bigger market and eventually find like, a reporting job somewhere in some town. Like I honestly have no idea what my life would be like if I hadn't gotten into video games.
Well, fortunately, you have carved out, I think, a really excellent quadrant for yourself, so we don't have to spend too much time thinking about those multiversal Andreas out there who are trying to make it in local news, which is also a tough industry to navigate. Okay, in terms of games that you've played recently, is there anything that you've played like in the last year or whenever that you believe is indicative of gaming's future?
That's such an interesting question because it really depends on what section of the video game industry you're looking at.
Right.
Video game development and trends span so many different styles and countries and economic brackets. It's really difficult to pin down trends across an industry as large as video games with just one or two specific games. But some of the games that I've played that I think are indicative of where we're seeing a lot of trends going include a game like Hades 2.
Mm-hmm.
This is a game that launched in early access and still doesn't have a full retail release yet, and they haven't announced when, but the idea of more games, particularly single player or narrative-based games, launching into early access first before having a retail release is something I think we're seeing more and more of, and I really hope more teams take advantage of.
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole nother debate to be had about paid early access and gating certain content, and then what do you do when the game finally goes retail? Like, we're just gonna, like, pin that for some other time, but I love the idea that developers get to have feedback with the people who wanna support their vision the most, the early adopters, the biggest fans, the people who are just so hungry for the content that these developers are making that they fully understand the game that they're getting is probably broken, that isn't feature set, that might change, the menu systems may be different, all of that, right? And I love that because it gives developers so much more flexibility and freedom to tweak their vision and to technically make improvements without having to launch the game and then have it be broken and then having it fail.
Yeah.
And then multiple years of work essentially being wiped out in, like a couple weeks or 1 month period because they didn't get the time that they needed to make the game right.
No, I love Hades 2 as an answer for multiple reasons, but I love that. It was funny. We were talking to Josh Sawyer from Obsidian a couple of months ago for the podcast, and he was saying that, like, yeah, that immediate feedback from the people who are playing your games, he was like, that was invaluable to him and his team when they were making the Pillars of Eternity games. And the other side of it is that something that I think about, and yeah, I'm curious as your thoughts on this. There are games that launch like full tail retail release that I'm like, this feels early access. For example, Star Wars Outlaws, the the game that launched, especially for the people that paid the $100 for the early access, like the actual 3-day period early access. There were so many problems with that game at launch that even the next week through patches, it was a superior experience and a different experience. And they even said, we're going to patch things further. All of the the AI for the spot, like for the sneaking around and stealth, like that was going to change over time. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, you're in early access. And I feel like so many games, Cyberpunk, like that's kind of an early access launch. It just didn't have that banner on it. So it is this thing of, like, I think even games that are not necessarily releasing and committing to we are early access are still doing this thing of, like, the expectation is that in a year most games will be improved and different in some way comparative to that launch release, even if it is a full retail. So it's I wonder if more places will take advantage of that, of being able to kind of put that label on, to try and you know, stave off criticism, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that you feel like you've experienced at all?
I see the business side of those decisions so much more because I talk to a lot of developers. It's
Hmm.
a big part of my job and interviewing people and just hearing people's stories about the development process. And so my heart always goes out to those teams that are pushed to publish their product before it's ready because there's, larger timelines at play within the publisher or whoever is distributing the game. And there's always going to be feature creep, right? This idea that when is the game ever going to be done? You have to have, these hard deadlines to get the game across the finish line because you could just keep adding and iterating and adding and iterating until the game never comes out, and then you get like a Star Citizen kind of situation
Yeah,
happening, right? And I don't know if there's a one size fits all answer. In fact, I would say that there's not. It really
of
wholly
course.
depends on the team. And the example that I use with Supergiant is pretty unique because, they are a relatively small and nimble team and independent. So they get to make their own rules and do whatever they want according to what's best for their team, which is awesome. But a lot of developers don't have that luxury because they're now with all of the acquisitions and the mergers that we've had over the last 5 years, there's a lot of former small teams that are now part of like very, very large organizations, and they have to kind of fit within the larger plans of those organizations instead of doing necessarily what's best for their studio.
Right.
And so it's really tough to, make even an analysis on individual games that misstepped, and quite frankly, I'm not going to. I just would like to encourage more teams to explore that as an option, and hopefully the people who are in charge are open to hearing the benefits of that.
Is there a game that you would, if you could, wipe your memory of to experience it fresh over again?
This was a really hard question to pick one game
Of
for
course.
because there's so many phenomenal games that are just such a treasure, but one of the games I think I would wipe my memory of and experience again all over is Portal.
Excellent
'Cause it's one
choice.
of the all-time classic video games that stands the test of time from a gameplay, design, narrative. Everything about Portal is just so well done, and it's so original and so funny, and just little quiet moments of, like, genius game development, and that's one of the games I love to recommend to people who are relatively new to gaming that
Mm.
probably wouldn't have heard of it and it never, like, really surfaces unless you're talking specifically about Valve, for some reason, but yeah, that game, one of the greats.
Yeah, it's almost like the game is game. I think if you know about Portal, which a lot of gamers do, but yeah, on the outside, you're not going to run into it. And obviously, the Portal 2 is such a, because Portal is like this game that was a part of this bundle, that was a part of this, like there are many layers to why that game even exists. But I do love that answer. I think it's an excellent answer, and I do like it being like almost like a gateway. Like, all right, you want to become like a serious gamer? Here's a little appetizer for you, with Portal. And if you wiped it from your memory, you'd get to experience it with like the RTX and all of the like ray tracing updates that
That's
they
true,
put. So
that's true, they've
that's,
done a lot of technical upgrades.
yeah, which I have yet to jump back into. But maybe one day, maybe I can get some Eternal Sunshine technology and do it fresh. Okay, last of the kind of these questions here. So obviously, the last couple of years in the industry have been really tough, between layoffs and consolidation, and then on the media side also, a lot of issues, the similar issues. Do you believe that the last couple of years that we've experienced are the most tumultuous time in gaming from your perspective?
They're certainly the most tumultuous time in gaming that I've been working in video games. I would say certainly the most tumultuous in the last 20 years video games as an industry had a big upheaval, like, in the late '90s, right? And
Hmm.
in the early 2000s, and it very much apples to oranges, what was happening there versus what's happening now. I think it's much more tumultuous in the sense that we know a lot more about what's happening because of social media, because of the way that communication technology exists, and because of the transparency that both consumers and shareholders demand of companies now. And because of that, we know so much more about what's going on and just how bad some of it really is.
Mm.
Whereas back then, a lot of like the really gnarly stuff kind of kept behind closed doors, only talked about, in quiet circles of bars of, conventions and things like that. But it's really hard to put a finger on, you know, the angst that the industry is feeling because it feels like consumers at large don't feel it. They don't
Yeah.
see it because the games industry overall is still very healthy. I think that's like the really tough part for people who are part of these layoffs or part of a studio that got shuttered or had their game canceled is that consumers who are out buying video games are like, wow, there's so many fantastic video games to play right now. There's more devices for me to play than ever before. I can play on my phone. I can play in VR. I can, play on the in the cloud, on all these special devices. And so it feels like video games are doing great because they are, but they're also
Mm.
having a really hard time. And it's like really difficult to come to terms with the kind of dichotomy of that.
That and all the answers to that I've gotten for this question, that's a great that no one has pointed that out yet, which I think is such a good point. Is that to any outsider, it would feel healthier than ever. As you said, so many options on how to play, so many options of what to play. The arguments that we get into every year with snubs and things like at the Game Awards. I'm like, well, there's a million games that deserve to be in this category. Like, it's impossible you're never going to please everyone. And every year, the amount of competitors I feel for each category just grows. And so you're totally right. It's such a kind of behind the scenes problem that to general consumers who are not paying attention to the daily news cycle aren't experiencing. They've got Game Pass. They have millions of games at their fingertips for less money than ever. Like, or well, they do increase their prices, so it's slightly more. But you're not having to shell out $60. On every release that comes by, you can experience a wealth of games for a third of that, even less if you go for like those lower tiers. So yeah, that's just a fascinating insight that I haven't even myself really thought about because I'm so plugged in. Like I've got tubes
You're
going
in the
into
bubble.
I'm in the matrix bubble of getting it right into the spinal column every time a layoff happens. Okay, well, thank you so much for those answers. Exceptional insight there. Let's shift more toward you and your career, and obviously for the last 7 years you had been running What's Good Games, this kind of podcast and network of content with several different hosts. And you guys recently made the decision to kind of wrap things up with that. I'm sure you've obviously talked to your community about kind of the decisions as to why that happened. But as much as you want to, can you go into just like top level, like why you came to the decision to end What's Good Games?
We had been talking about it for a few years, really since Brittany and I became moms. So during the
Mm.
pandemic, both Brittany Brombacher, who was my business partner for What's Good Games, and I became pregnant at the same time, very coincidentally. And, when we had our babies, we took a very short maternity leave, 3 months, which is not enough time. And even though we ran our own business, we made that decision because we knew the pressure to keep creating consistently was going to slowly erode our business if we didn't get back to work. And that's just the grind that anybody who makes digital content goes through. And we decided to come back and realize quickly just how difficult it was for us to prioritize playing games and making sure we're informed on the news and getting ready for the
Mm.
show every week while also being full-time moms of infants. And, we didn't quite have the mental bandwidth or the budget to go and hire additional people. And so over time, it became clear that, we were either going to have the show suffer while we were prioritizing family, or we would have to just put the show in indefinite hiatus. And we tried a hiatus when our third chair, Rihanna Manuel Pena, had her baby and went on maternity leave. And we did a lot of thinking and soul searching, being like, like, what do we want out of the show? What do we want the show to become? Because when we launched What's Good Games back in 2017, we did so with Christine Steimer and Alexa Ray Correa. And the industry was different. We were different. What we were covering was different. And the time that we had to devote to it was much more plentiful than it is now. And, that was a huge factor. The fact that we're all three of us are moms, and that is our number one priority is being a mom and taking care of our kids. But also, we learned over time that we kind of had this compulsion to keep covering what was popular video game wise in the industry or in trends versus what was really exciting to us.
Mm.
And trying to split that balance between doing the things that we were passionate about, but also trying to make sure we're managing SEO and doing what the audience wants to see became increasingly difficult when we had fewer and fewer hours to game. And so we just kind of came to this decision of, do we want to keep doing content that our hearts aren't fully into, or do we want to reformat the show? Is it still going to be What's Good Games if we reformat it? So a lot of thought went into us deciding maybe it's just time for us to do a series finale and go out on a high note after seeing so many good friends of ours in media and in content creation have their channels or outlets just shuttered underneath of them, their work wiped
Mm.
from the internet, which is just so heartbreaking. And it's happened to me more than once. Is that we were like, we don't want something to happen to anybody where we don't get to choose why we're ending the show. Let's do it on our own terms. Let's make it the celebration that we want it to be. And that's the decision we went with.
I'm really happy you guys got that, because it really was clear that I think the rollout of the announcement, the build up to the final show, I think was probably as great as a swan song that you could hope for. And yeah, it's better than one day waking up and realizing that, oh, this has collapsed collapsed in on itself, or whatever
Yeah,
fate
you
may
don't even
have.
get like a farewell episode. You don't get to make like a goodbye post. I mean, so many outlets that's happened to over the last several years of people just getting a memo or an email like in the middle of the night and then, getting their stuff in a box and they don't
Yeah.
even get to tell their audience goodbye, like it's heartbreaking.
It really sucks, especially as someone, we were actually meant to record this a couple of weeks ago, but we experienced layoffs at GameSpot that week, and I hit you up. I was like, I don't know if I have the mental capacity to do this right now. And yeah, I mean, the fact that it is like they're gone. Like, those people are they're not on Slack. Their emails have been removed. Like, they're just, I mean, for all intents and purposes, like, dead to you at this point, which really is tough. And even the wildest thing was, we had some team members who weren't immediately ejected out of the airlock because they work in the UK, and they can't do that. That there has to be like a time period. I think they have to like negotiate when they leave with the company. But even then, I'd reach out to them on Slack and be like, hey, like, when is your last day? Like, so I can be prepared. And they were like, I don't know how much, I don't think I can tell you, like, legally, like, I can't even tell you when that is. So even then, even though I had a heads up with them, they were also like eventually just ejected, and it was a surprise. Yeah, no, it's really brutal. And I'm glad that you guys were able to have that special moment there. rewinding the clock 7 years to you guys kicking what's good games off, especially like I remember that announcement, and seeing you guys build that. I think there was, correct me if I'm wrong, a very clear and a clear idea of we are making a women-led podcast, and there really isn't, let alone women on other podcasts or like entirely women hosted podcasts. Is that something that was present at the time and continued throughout? And do you think that your expectation of what's good games became matches up with what your intentions were at the beginning of kicking it off?
A lot to unpack in that
Yeah,
question.
sorry. I
No, I'll
realized
start
as I
with
went
my
on.
expectations absolutely do not match.
Mhm.
I never in my wildest dreams imagined what What's Good Games would end up becoming. The community, it would end up becoming the, like, beacon of hope for so many people who have been othered in the video games
Mm,
spaces, and a source of inspiration for people to pursue their dreams of being in video game development or working in the video games industry. I mean, we never set out to do that. It just happened because we wanted to have a space where we could be nerdy and talk about video games and feel like we weren't constantly being criticized or ridiculed or judged for our opinions not being gamer enough, which was something that was happening to all of us in many spaces and happens still to this day to a lot of women in particular, that, you get this attitude of, well, you haven't played this game, so are you even a real gamer? Even people who know me and know that I've been working in the video games business for a really long time still ask me if I actually play video games. And I'm like, is that a real question? As if you think I could do my job and not play video games, but more so, why would I want to work in video games if I didn't absolutely love them? Because turns out people are really mean sometimes. In
yeah,
fact, a lot of the time, they're really mean and judgmental about if you're gamer enough, or if you've got a good enough skills, or if you're playing the right games, or if your opinions are good enough for them. And it's like, it's exhausting. And it's so frustrating that that takes over so much of the discourse, when in reality, people who work in games and people who are part of video game communities are actually really happy, positive,
yeah,
accepting, supporting, caring people. And we were really trying to beat that drum with What's Good Games, to remind people that the vocal minority that makes you feel like the toxicity is all there is in games is actually a small part of a much bigger, more passionate, wonderful community of really friendly, nice people. It's
yeah,
like there are way more nice people in video game communities and in video game development than there are assholes.
yeah.
And, that's been a journey with What's Good, because when I had the idea to start What's Good Games, I was very adamant that we were never gonna call our show like a girl gaming show.
Hmm.
Like, we're not like this show that's just for girl gamers or about girls who game. We are a show led by 4 professionals with over 30 years of combined, at the time it was 35 years of combined video game experience in the industry, from development to marketing to media to community and social, like all areas of video games we had covered between the 4 of us. And that was what we really were passionate about, of, you should come and listen to our show, not because 'cause we're super nerds who would talk about video games in our mom's basement like a lot of other gaming podcasts, but because we're super nerds who've worked in the industry and have insight that you're not gonna get from all of the other shows out
Hmm.
there. And turns out people were into that.
They were receptive. Surprise, surprise. Well, I'm really, I think it would be easy to look at you guys winding down the show as an outsider and think like, oh, this, for lack of a better word, failed because it ended, right? But it seems that from what you discussed, that like, no, this blew our expectations out of the water of what it could become. So it's phenomenal to know that it exceeded even your wildest dreams there. You mentioned community, and part of the reason why I started this podcast was to have healthier discussions and more productive discourse about gaming and the industry, because there's so much of not that on the internet, and
Correct.
unfortunately, but also now, especially with the recent election, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that these online communities that people are a part of have a massive effect on their well-being, on their views of the world and of other people. And so I'm even trying to elevate, going into 2025, elevate what this is to be about that positive community. Now that What's Good Games is over, but there is still that community there. Those people, that listen are still there. Even though the show has ended, is it something that you are trying to preserve that community and engage with still? Like, what does the What's Good Games community look like going forward?
That's a tough question to answer because some of it we're still
Figuring it
figuring
out,
out
sure.
from a legal perspective and the
Mm,
business entities and all that. So, but in regards to the groups of people who have formed their own friendships, who have started their own Discord servers, their own Facebook fan club pages so that they can keep connected, their own guilds and clans and things like that. It's so heartwarming for us to see how many people formed real bonds with other people through our community and found friends and people that they talk to regularly, and it just makes it all so worth it, like the late nights and the early mornings and the long days and all of the travel and all of the stress and dealing with just everything that comes along with running a business and a brand. Hearing the personal stories of people who found our show or rediscovered their love of gaming through our show or introduced a sibling, a spouse, a friend to games because they got inspired by something they heard on our show is just makes it all worth it, and where they are now, like, I mean, our Discord is still up for the time being, but might not be by the end of 2024.
okay.
But we are hoping that that attitude of everybody is welcome, and you can always be passionate and have passionate opinions. You just can't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Will be more
Very
pervasive in
simple.
other outlets.
Very simple rules, I feel, but
I mean, it's not that hard, right? It's
yeah.
like you can have controversial, passionate opinions. You just can't be mean to another person about theirs. Like, be mean about ideas, but not towards people. It seems like pretty basic stuff, but it's turns out not.
It's very, very complicated, it seems. Okay, interesting. I didn't even think about like there potentially being business things involved with it, but it'll be interesting to see how that forms. So we're at this, I think you just took also, you finished What's Good Games. You just had a little some time away as well. I'm sure you're looking to, now that 2024 is ending, your future. Is there any kind of insight we can gain that you can provide on what you're looking to do now that What's Good Games is wrapped up?
I've been getting asked this question a lot, and on the finale, I was asked too. And I'm still very much trying to get myself to take an extended break because I've been hustling for content creation and online hosting and producing for almost 20 years now.
Mm,
And it's a lot. It really, really builds up, and creator burnout is 100% a thing. And I've been off What's Good Games now for about 5 weeks, and I feel like I'm just now coming up for air and wanting to start playing games again because I took multiple weeks off of like not playing anything. I was
mm,
like, I just need to not do video games for just a few weeks, a little bit, just to like kind of palate cleanse
yeah.
and What that means for me going forward is still TBD. I mean, I very much am still doing a lot of the on-camera hosting that I was doing so much of before What's Good Games, during What's Good Games. I took obviously a break during the pandemic, as we all did when everything was shut down. But I love working with the publishers that I've had the pleasure and honor of working with. I'm very proud that I've worked with pretty much every major publisher in video games to date, which is very exciting. Most recently working with Square Enix and the Deck Nine Games
Yeah.
team for Life is Strange, Double Exposure at PAX West and New York Comic Con, and getting to interview Phil Spencer on stage at PAX and doing things with the AIAS at Summer Game Fest. Things like that I love doing and will continue to do. But in regards to what's my next show that I'm going to do regularly, well, nothing to announce at this time, as
Sure.
my PR friends like to say.
You're plugged in. You clearly got the PR expertise there. Well, it's good to know that you got some gaming time coming up, and so we can wrap up today's discussion by talking about what are you excited to play? What have you been champing at the bit now that you've come up for air? Is there anything that you're looking forward to jumping into in particular?
I'm a huge BioWare fan. Mass
Mm,
Effect 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. So, of course, Dragon Age: The Veilguard was at the top of my list. And normally I would have been playing it pre-release and all through the water cooler moments of launch, but I just needed a break. Like I said, I had to take some time off. And so just last night, actually, I devoted multiple hours to making my rook, doing the creator or character creator, and then doing the first opening like prologue missions, and very excited to dive very deep into that game. And I still have to finish the final chapters of Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII
yep.
Rebirth, which I haven't done yet either. And I also would like to get back to my valley in Disney Dreamlight Valley, my favorite cozy game of the
Hell yeah.
moment. So lots on my plate, and that's just a handful of things. There's a lot. There's a lot I want to go back and play.
It must be nice to like, especially with being such a big BioWare fan and Dragon Age being there for you to not have to feel like pressured to finish it or get through it for content. And you bring up Rebirth was one for me that when the reviews were coming out for it, so much of it was like seemed to be like there's so much to do, and even though people had like a month to play that game, it was still overwhelming. And so I actually made a conscious decision of like, I'm going to take the year to play Rebirth, and maybe longer even, but like I'm not going to try and finish it in by the end of the month or whatever happens. And it's funny, it worked out because the PS5 Pro came out and everyone was like, Rebirth actually runs and looks good on this console. I was like, great, I still have so much of that game left to play. So I picked up my Final Fantasy VII Rebirth machine, aka the PS5 Pro, and myself have been also jumping back into that one. But yeah, not having to play a game with the pressures of content in mind is definitely a more enjoyable way, and I'm glad that you have that for a franchise that you're so personally connected to. Okay, Andrea, final question before we wrap up here. Obviously, you yourself are taking a step back from the content creation for the time. Are there any content creators out there though that you do follow that you would point toward that you feel like are championing the same kind of things that you were, that people can kind of maybe some of your What's Good listeners could look to as this is who I'm going to whose content I'm going to engage with now that What's Good is wrapped?
We were hoping to put together a master list of that before the finale, and it just fell through the cracks because I had a lot of tasks on my plate leading
Makes sense.
into the finale recording. But one of the creators that I personally go back to time and time again because I worked with them quite a bit is Kind of Funny. Of course, I love the team at Kind of Funny
Yeah.
and Kind of Funny Games. I love the content that they do. It's just so varied. There's a little bit of something for everybody, whether you're into movies or TV, or you just want to watch funny streams, or you want to just be there for reviews or news. they've really cranked out their content in a way that I think is addressing what audience wants from them, and they could just continue to make smart decisions about, adapting their vision for their brand to what their team also wants to do, but also what their audience wants. And I love those guys over there. Just a wonderful crew of people making some really awesome content. So always happy to recommend My Kind of Funny Family. There's also just so many other content creators in different verticals outside of games that I'm spending more time with now. People that I've known from my early days of YouTube or other kinds of creators. People like Mari Takahashi, or Atomic Mari, as she goes by on her social handles, who has been doing some really wonderful, more scripted narrative style pieces about being a creator. She actually has her first film in a couple film festivals, so I'm like super proud of her. She and I worked together back at Defy Media under Smosh Games, and so she's doing really cool stuff. And there's always podcasts if you prefer that format too. If you're into news, Naomi Kyle has a weekly news roundup called This Week in Gaming. You can get it on Spotify or a number of other podcast apps or radio apps. If you're just looking for like quick hit news, that is a great place to go. And then you want something more like super nerdy, you've got something like Axe of the Blood God, from Kat Bailey and her crew over there. There's just so many wonderful video game content creators out there. It's hard to kind of summarize it briefly.
100%. It's interesting, kind of funny as lads that I have been following for, I think since the inception as well. And one of the things that they brought up that I saw, when I was like trying to come up with questions for you and looking into what's good games, people bring up what Greg has often said, which is, you have to go out and support your the creators that you are passionate about. And I'm curious, and feel free to obviously again answer how you want here. Was there, obviously lots of decisions going into the choice to wind What's Good Games down, but was the size of it ever, like, for example, like if it had, for lack of a better word, become bigger, right? Like if it had expanded and you guys pulled in more, Patreon support and stuff like that, would that have affected, do you think, the outcome of your decision? Or based on what you described, it sounds like no matter what, it probably would have had to have wound down, and that really wasn't much of a consideration.
I mean, yes, it's always a consideration when
Mm,
you have a larger audience versus a smaller one, particularly ones that are supporting you through paid subscriptions. And that, of course, was a big consideration for us. We as content creators weren't able to give enough custom content for our paid members to keep growing that community and to keep offering new ways for people to come in and feel like they're getting, the equivalent value for their dollar. And it's so tough when you talk about premium memberships or supporting creators. And I'm with Greg. I say this from the rooftops all the time, that if you like a creator and you don't want their content to go away, you have to monetarily support them in some way.
mm,
And that can be with your time, or it can be with your dollars, or preferably with both. It can be you leaving a 5-star review on their podcast or giving them a rating on Spotify. It could be you liking and subscribing on YouTube. It could be subbing on Twitch or just following on Twitch, recommending it to somebody else. There's a lot of ways to support creators without spending money, but spending your time. But spending your money helps them go just that much further, because content creation is not free. I
yep.
mean, there's a lot of ongoing expenses between equipment and creative software subscriptions and everything that comes along with traveling to events to go to get the content for the show, right? Like it's not free for people to make content, but there's this expectation that a lot of viewers have that they don't have to pay for things, that it's just there because it's on YouTube and you don't have to pay for YouTube and it's free and I can skip through all the ads and my creator will be just fine if I never give them a single dollar. And that's a really hard thing to grapple with as a creator. I think at one point I posted a couple of years back when we were doing like a relaunch of our private membership that only about 5% of our audience had ever supported What's Good Games monetarily,
Right.
which is very common, by the way.
Yeah.
Most audiences are that way. And it's a little bananas when you think about it, about that over 90%, 90 to 95% of the people who download or listen to a show don't pay for it or support it financially in any way whatsoever. And this idea that creators are just supposed to be able to keep going year after year, it's like it's not tenable. Fees go up. I remember we were so full of anxiousness about raising our Patreon the first time, but the platform and credit card fees all went up and taxes went up. And we're like, if we only have a dollar as like the tier, we're taking home like 25 cents of that dollar
Mm.
to pay ourselves with. And all of the rest of it goes to other people or other things. And so we're like, what are we even doing if that's all we're getting out of it?
Right.
And that's why the prices keep going up. And that was a huge consideration into our decision to sunset the show. I spoke about this at length in our finale stream
Mm.
where I, discussed that a big part of why we also wanted to wind down right now is because it's a really tough economic climate for a lot of people. I mean, clearly a huge impact on the election here in the United States, people feeling the pinch of the cost of literally everything across the board.
Yeah.
And we didn't feel right continuing to ask our audience to pay a premium membership to help support our brand, to help support the content that we were creating, when we ourselves were in this tumultuous place of what is the content that we want to create. We didn't have a clear vision, of where we wanted to take the brand in the future. And so we were like, we think it's better for people to take those dollars and put them towards their family or to other things in their life, or towards another creator if they have the ability and the privilege to be able to pay content creators to go and spend it with somebody else. But it's tough for a lot of people around the world right now, and trying to justify paying for a Patreon here, a private subscription here, a Substack here, and then you've got your Netflix and your Disney Plus and your YouTube Premium and your Spotify Premium. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so much. It's so much. And it's just so hard to keep asking people to give. And we didn't want to do it anymore. But we were so grateful because that support meant everything to us. And we had a lot of private supporters who were with us the entire time
Yeah.
we were open. And it was so incredible to meet so many of them face to face at our community meetups and conventions, and get to know them in our Twitch chats and play games with them. And it was such a wonderful experience being able to have that relationship with those people.
Yeah.
But it absolutely was a consideration in the decision to wind the company down.
That's recently I canceled my Adobe. I'd had enough of Adobe's crap with their changes to all of their products that were just making them worse. And so I was like, oh, I've got this extra money every month. Let's go support some creators. So I would as well also implore people to look at their subscriptions, whether it's across, music or something like Netflix. Are you getting your money's worth? Is there someone you can go support directly that is going to provide you? Because I will never cancel my Kind of Funny membership. Everything else can fall. I'll cancel Disney Plus. I'll cancel Apple Music. Kind of Funny's getting my money no matter what. I love the way that you talked about that element of What's Good Games and giving back, people saying it's okay. There are other places to put this. Unfortunate that so much of this and the world, but this industry obviously is driven by the money making, and the reality is that people have to make money in order to keep doing these things and keep committing. So I think it's simultaneously, I think it will be felt that What's Good Games not continuing, but also I think you guys have irrevocably left your mark on the industry, and so many people will be inspired to either start their own things or champion those values that you guys brought to the community. And I think it's very important as we head into a very uncertain future, both in gaming and in general, to make sure that those important virtues are carried across, because there's a lot of people championing very different values, and that is very scary. And so,
Yes. Anger is very popular on the internet right now, unfortunately.
and it's only becoming more and more prevalent in everyone's daily life. So I promise. A lot of the things that you guys were championing, I will be continuing to try and carve out a little slice of pleasantness on
Baby
the
has
internet.
baby mode forever.
Yes. Andrea, thank you so much for joining me. If people wanted to find you online so they can eventually find out, what you may be involved with, where can people do that?
I'm pretty much at Andrea Rene on every platform. I've been spending most of my time between Instagram and now Blue Sky.
Yes.
So if you're on Blue Sky, come find me over there. So yeah, that's what is that? Andrea Rene dot bsky dot social. Hopefully they figure that out because that's kind of a mouthful to have to say all the time. But Andrea Rene underscore on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok. So I'm taking a break right now, like I mentioned. So a
Yeah.
little quieter than normal. Of course, I'll probably start popping off as we get closer to the Game Awards
Oh,
because
yes.
I love this season of the year where we all celebrate all the fantastic work that has been done throughout the year. But yeah, more to come in 2020, 25.
I,
2025?
there's a couple of 20s added there. Hopefully we
Exactly.
don't have to wait that
That's how
long.
that's how my brain feels right now, just in permanent skip mode.
Well, I'm going to let you go so you can enjoy more time away, enjoy more Dragon Age. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching. Make sure to, as Andrea said, go and support this podcast, share it with other people, give it a like, give it a subscribe, and I don't currently have any kind of monetary situation set up, but yeah, just please go share the podcast. And I think that this discussion, if you're into the gaming industry, if you're into content creation, those kinds of things, has been excellent. Again, thank you so much, Andrea, and we will see everyone next time.